Hello and welcome to Talk D93, Community Consolidated School District 93's podcast, hosted by me, Superintendent Dr. David Hill. In it, I sit down from time to time with key figures who impact our district to have conversations about specific CCSD93 programs, services, roles, events, history, and more. Today, I'm excited to host a conversation about restorative practices in CCSD93. For those who don't know, restorative practices are a systematic way our schools and classrooms build community so that each student feels included and accountable to their peers. This creates more productive learning environments and reduces the amount of time classrooms spend devoted to discipline. To help give us an overview of restorative practices and the many ways they are valuable to our schools, I am pleased to be joined by CCSD93 Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, Dr. Crysta Morrissey, Elsie Johnson Principal Maria Weber, and School Resource Officer Pablo Castro of the Carroll Stream Police Department. Welcome, Dr. Morrissey, Principal Weber, and Officer Castro.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking Dr. Morrissey, what are restorative practices and why were they brought on to District 93?
So restorative practices are a systematic way to build community and forge relationships in classrooms. We brought them into District 93 to enhance what we're doing with students. In the area of our strategic plan, we talk about the social emotional development of our students. And restorative practices allows us to fully implement systems that support the whole child. Making certain that every child's voice is heard really allows to build community and relationships, not just with the teacher and the students, but student to student as well. There's a great deal of educational research that improved academic outcomes also occur when students are participating in environments where they have a shared sense of community, where they feel honored and their voice can be heard. And so restorative practices allows us a systematic way to do that in all of our buildings to enhance the learning environment for all of our students.
One component of restorative practices is community circles. Dr. Morrissey, can you tell us a little bit about how these look for students and what they accomplish?
Certainly. There's a variety of circles that we do. Sometimes we do circles in content-specific areas where kids are learning in circle. We also do circles to build community and relationships. What a circle basically is kids coming together, making certain that every voice is heard. So the circle is designed for a system of responding or communicating with each other. We actually do it in a very strategic way where there is a talking piece and norms that we all agree upon, and each child or adult who's in the circle then has an opportunity to answer a question, participate, and share in that. Every student's voice is heard that way with the talking piece. We make certain that all people in the circle are actively listening to their peers, and in this way we get to know each peer, whereas if you're not in circle, sometimes one or two voices in the classroom might be overemphasized or they may share more than others. In a circle format, we're allowing each child to really participate fully, whether that's an academic or a community circle or even possibly a restorative circle. If there's a situation in a classroom where students are struggling to follow expectations, the teacher might circle up the students to talk through how do they resolve that issue, and that way every student is a part of creating that climate and culture for the classroom.
Thank you, Dr. Morrissey. It's a very nice overview of community circles. Are there other components of the restorative practices?
Certainly. Circles are just one piece of restorative practices, and it really allows to build kind of a foundation of trust and community. But in addition, we talk about restoration and restorative practices. We also talk about making certain that students are building on the skill of empathy and understanding, that they're building on the skill of knowing their impact and how their actions affect others, as well as being able to assess and participate in restoring harm that might be done from when expectations aren't followed properly. So a piece of that is really looking at making certain that we're using affective questions or affective statements. One affective question is, what do you think you need to do to make things right? So for example, if a situation's occurred where a student has unintentionally harmed someone else in a behavioral situation, the administration or the teacher will go through restorative questions with them and get to that last piece of it is, what do you think you need to do to make things right? And that really assists them then in being able to restore or repair the harm that has been caused. In addition to working through restorative questions when there's, like say, a discipline situation, that doesn't mean that there's no consequences given as well. So there's always, when we talk about restorative practices in the sense of discipline, we always have natural or logical consequences that occur, learning as well as restoration. And so the restorative practices are what we've added to enhance our discipline processes across the district.
Thank you. This sounds like a really important thing that we're doing organizationally. Where are CCSD93 schools in implementing restorative practices?
So we've been working on rolling out the systems for about 5 years. We began with a pilot at Western Trails School in Carroll Stream, and then rolled into Cloverdale and Stratford Middle School. And this year we're training the rest of our schools. We do that through a trainer models. So there's a restorative team in each building that gets intensive training, and then those teams go back to their building and train their teachers as well as their students on the restorative process. Western Trails has been at it for about 5 years, and they have really come a long way in their implementation of restorative practices. Maria Weber was the assistant principal when they began to do that. And I think she's going to talk a little bit about what's been happening in that pilot and where they have gotten to at this point.
Yep, I'd be happy to share that. So it was very exciting in year one to have the building team participate in the training, because every team member was really excited to see how we can bring this knowledge to all of our classrooms in our building. We participated in training and then developed how we would roll it out in our building and have it applied to all of our classrooms. So it was exciting to see as we became comfortable with the affective questions, the affective statements, talking about restorative circles and logical consequences with our teams, and how we can make it individual to each situation that occurred or incident. Our first year, we took the theory and the understanding and developed our own PD on how it would apply to our buildings. So we had our staff participate in the PD, but the biggest part was to allow them time to practice and try. We collected data along the way as well on community circles to see how often it was happening in the classrooms. We took that data and that information and would adjust our professional development to try to increase how often circles was happening. The most exciting part was walking into some of the classrooms that did it on a very regular basis, feeling that community amongst the students and the staff. And you recognize that there really was a feeling of community that was built through circles. And then in year two of it, it was more of getting the students to participate in it. So there was one situation where I had a group of students in my office and they were problem solving with me. And I had the opportunity to see them to ask the questions of one another. Rather it being led by me, the generalization was very exciting to see that students were starting to talk about how did it make you feel when that happened? Well, this is how I felt, and sharing that information with one another. And then to go into the logical consequence of how they can together work through that to repair what was done. And then as we look to year three and on, we really spent some time surveying our students and doing fidelity checks with our students and our staff, which allowed Western Trails to continue the professional development and identify areas to allow us to continue to grow. I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to bring restorative practices to Elsie Johnson and seeing the same successes.
Thank you. Principal Weber, what did you observe throughout Western Trail's implementation in terms of student learning and student behavior with restorative practices?
The data showed improvement between relationships between students and staff. There really was a recognition that everybody was going to be heard. And together it was going to be a we rather than a to or a me. We really approached everything with students when we were resolving conflict of we. How are we going to talk about this? What can we do together moving forward? What do we think a natural consequence will be? And it really did shift a lot of the outcomes regarding consequences with our students. It was really rewarding to see the data as well as we saw discipline in various areas reduce, so that was also rewarding.
Thank you. Dr. Morrissey, you mentioned building community with those outside of the classroom. Are you able to provide an example of this?
Certainly, I'd be happy to. One piece of our restoration is making certain that we build inside our schools as well as outside of our schools. So we took the same approach of having circles into our Equity and Excellence Parent Committee, and we held a circle, actually 4 different circles with parents. During that circle, what came to be clear is that families really wanted to feel more connected to the community, and a piece of where they wanted that connection was with our Carroll Stream Police Department. There were several comments made in that circle that they felt that while the police department was coming in and working with our students in DARE, they felt like they needed to see more of their police officers, and that they really wanted the police officers to build stronger relationships and understanding of their students. So we attempted to build on that and now have police officers coming in for our 2nd grade Adopt-A-Cop, and they're actually sitting in circle with students, so that way the officers get to know the students better, and the students then get to know the officers better in ways outside of what you would typically think a police officer's connection to the community or school would be. As we talk about bringing those police officers in to that, Officer Castro was instrumental in helping us build that, and I believe we're going to continue to develop it and enhance it for the years to come.
So one of the first things that we did last year was we put together a program where we had roughly about 22 police officers visit 1st grade classrooms, and they went and they sat in a circle with 1st grade students. The purpose of that was for the students just to ask our police officers basic questions. What's your favorite ice cream? What's your favorite book? And so the officer was responding back similar to questions that the 1st graders have, which made it very interesting for both the officers, the students in the classroom, and even the teachers. They really enjoyed the program that we did coming in last year. Then after that, we, like Dr. Crysta Morrissey mentioned, our Adopt-A-Cop program. Our Adopt-A-Cop program has been going on for about 10 years now, but never fully where we had officers in every single 2nd grade classroom. And the purpose of the Adopt-A-Cop program is for a police officer to be adopted by that 2nd grade classroom. The officer goes into the 2nd grade classroom, they read a book, or they sit in a community morning circle. Maybe they show them their police car. They'll do different activities with the officer throughout that month of the school year. Our Officer Carol Cato, our crime prevention officer and public education officer, is in charge of that program and has done a phenomenal job putting officers in every 2nd grade classroom, as hard as that can be, with officers having different shift schedules, being in patrol or being in investigations. Even our command staff, our police chief, Bill Homer, is one of our Adopt-A-Cop police officers, so he visits the 2nd grade classroom as well. So those are some of the things that we've done. We also this year, last summer, started NRCs, which are neighborhood roll calls. And our neighborhood roll calls are very similar to community circles, where police officers have their actual roll call before their shift starts, and they'll pick a spot in the community and they'll sit in the community, and the community will come out and listen to roll call given, and they'll get to hear what's happening in their community. And after the roll call is done, the officers then engage with the community members that come out. We had a very huge success with that. We also visit different PTA classrooms or events that they have. So those are just some of the small things that we have been doing for a long time. But I will say that over the last year, we've really been more invested into making an effort into having more officers in our schools.
Thank you very much. Officer Castro, we certainly value our partnerships with you and your fellow officers. Would you be so kind to explain a bit to you and your colleagues' experiences with restorative practices?
Sure. So restorative practices, I've had the opportunity to sit in several restorative conferences with things that have come up over the time. Most recently this week, I sat in a restorative conference with one of our facilitators, Sabrina Connolly, and I sat in a restorative conference also with Mr. Petrosky, the principal at J-Stream. And in that restorative conference, there were probably about 7 students, and we were discussing something that was happening in social media. It was a conflict that was happening with social media, and everyone had a talking piece. Everyone shared what was going on, and really, in that part, I was able to provide my education, my experience in regards to law enforcement and the legal implications that could happen had they proceeded further with what they were doing on social media. And it was pretty neat. I know that Dr. Crysta Morrissey talked a little bit about how some students even take ownership for some of the things that they do in these circles. And we actually had a student who actually took ownership and actually said, I want to apologize to everyone in the circle for my involvement in what was going on. So it was pretty neat to hear that coming from students.
Sounds like an outstanding experience. Thank you. I know we could spend a lot more time getting into the details of restorative practices, but thank you all very much for joining me for this overview. Dr. Morrissey, Principal Weber, and Officer Castro, I truly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk D93 listeners, please subscribe to Talk D93 on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify, and don't miss a thing from CCSD93 by following us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter at drhilld93. Join us next time for more from CCSD93. Thank you.